We were underage. We were little girls.
I was 16.
I was 16.
I started going to him when I was like 14 turning 15.
Alan Durshowitz is a prominent attorney in the United States with a history of representing both accused and convicted wealthy sex offenders. Some of his high-profile cases include defending convicted billionaire pedophile Jeffrey Epstein and accused Hollywood rapist Harvey Weinstein.
She's like, oh, do you need to make any extra money? I'm like, yeah. She's like, okay, I can give you, like $200. There's this older guy in Palm Beach. He gets a lot of massages from girls. That was really...
They were recruited by someone who was adept at finding girls that would be willing to, go to a house for a few $100s. And as it started out, give a man a back rub, but many cases it turned into something far worse than that, elevated to a crime, and a serious crime, in some cases sexual batteries.
Dershowitz was a member of Epstein's legal defense team when he was given a sweetheart deal by then U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, now Trump's labor secretary, and sentenced to just 13 months in work release despite the mountain of evidence against him.
My life would have been different if I would have never went to Jeffrey Epstein's house. It was just a dark turning point in my life.
On June 30th, 2008, Jeffrey Epstein, a Palm Beach multimillionaire hedge fund manager, received what might have been the most lenient plea deal for a serial sex offender in U.S. history. The Miami Herald identified over 60 of his victims, just young middle and high school girls at the time of the abuse. More than a decade later, several of them are talking for the first time about how they were molested by Epstein and believe they were betrayed by the very prosecutors who were supposed to hold Epstein accountable.
Epstein is a convicted child molester and sexually abused no less than 40 underage girls. Despite this fact, Acosta protected him while serving as a U.S. attorney in Florida. And Dershowitz played a huge role in the deal.
They came from fairly disadvantaged backgrounds. There was some dysfunction in their families. The lure of a lot of money was more than they were able to resist.
I went from an abusive situation to being a runaway to living in foster homes to just already being hardened by life on the streets.
The other girls that I personally know of that were coming from trailer parks, that were having gun shootings, drugs.
My mother was on drugs at the time, and she couldn't provide for me, and I was pretty much homeless.
Now, after multiple revelations have come to light, a new victim has gone public in the Epstein case, filing a sworn affidavit in federal court in New York on Tuesday. Maria Farmer swore to the court that while she was employed by Epstein, she frequently saw, quote, school-age girls wearing uniforms come into the mansion and go upstairs.
One child would be lured over, would be paid substantial sums of money, would be offered the further inducement of being paid a bounty for anybody else that she was able to bring to Epstein. A network developed where many young girls in the same kinds of circumstance wound up being victimized.
Farmer also claimed that she and her then 15-year-old sister were sexually assaulted by Epstein and his companion, Ghislaine Maxwell. Farmer said she reported the abuse to both the FBI and the NYPD when it occurred in 1996, but neither agencies acted. She wrote, noting that while she was an art student at the time, quote, to my knowledge, I was the first person to report Maxwell and Epstein to the FBI. It took a significant amount of bravery for me to make that call because I knew how incredibly powerful and influential both Epstein and Maxwell were, particularly in the art community.
By the time I was 16, I brought him up to 75 girls, all the ages of 14, 15, 16, people going from 8th grade to 9th grade at just school parties is where I recruit them from.
Farmer's affidavit is now part of a move to go after the man who defended Epstein and who's also accused of partaking in the child sex trafficking, and that would be Alan Durshowitz.
All Jeffrey cared about was go find me more girls. His appetite was insatiable. He couldn't stop. He wanted new, fresh, young faces every single day.
The sheer volume of girls, the frequency, sometimes several or many in the same day. The age of the girls. In some cases, there were victims that didn't know each other, had never met each other, but they had basically the same story.
According to the Miami Herald, Farmer's affidavit is one of 15 exhibits attached to a defamation complaint filed in federal court in the Southern District of New York by Virginia Roberts Guffrey, one of Epstein's victims against Alan Durshowitz, who's one of Epstein's most vocal and powerful attorneys.
I remember there was a staircase, and it was like kind of like a spiral almost.
And she brings us up the stairs, and it was like spiral stairs.
You walked into his bedroom, around his bed, to almost like a very little hall, and then it was another door. And that's where everything would happen, was in his bathroom. He would have a dresser, and it was filled with like, the first drawer was lotion, and then like the third drawer down was like sex toys.
Guffrey claims in the lawsuit, as she has in past court filings, that Dershowitz, who's 80 years old, knew about and participated in a sex trafficking operation involving underage girls and run by Epstein and Maxwell, and that she was forced to have sex with Dershowitz and other prominent wealthy men when she was underage.
So we would take the massage table out and set it up in the middle of the room.
And then he came in with his white towel on around him.
And then he just laid down in his towel on his stomach, and he was just talking to people on the phone. When he flipped over, that's when he said, okay, you can go ahead and take off your shirt and pants, but you can stay in your underwear.
He would want us to stand next to him, and he would while he stared at us, touched us.
To pull his nipples and to play with them in between his fingers, and also while I was playing with his nipples, he kept doing that stuff to me. But he was very aggressive, like when he would do it.
And then a pat on the back. You've done a really good job. Like, you know, thank you very much, and here's $200. You know, before you know it, I'm being lent out to politicians and to academics and to people that royalty and people that you would never think, like, how did you get into that position of power in the first place if you're this disgusting, evil, decrepit person on the inside?
Guffrey said in a statement, "No sensible person looks forward to litigation, and I know that standing up for myself and others will cause Mr. Dershowitz and Mr. Epstein to redouble their efforts to destroy me and my reputation. But I can no longer sit by and not respond. As my complaint shows, my abusers have sought to conceal their guilt behind a curtain of lies. My complaint calls for the accounting to which I and their other victims are entitled."
Epstein, then in his 50s, was also suspected of organizing sex activities with underage girls at his homes in New York City, New Mexico, and on his private island in the Caribbean.
You're talking about hundreds of children all over the world.
Victims that were alleged sex slaves of Jeffrey Epstein that they brought over from Eastern Bloc countries.
Even the court found that this case has been engulfed in lies. A federal judge made a bombshell ruling which stated that the prosecutors who worked under former Miami U.S. Attorney Acosta broke the law when handling the case. According to the ruling, the prosecutors acted illegally when they concealed a plea agreement from more than 30 underage victims who had been sexually abused by the New York hedge fund manager.
I've seen hundreds and hundreds of girls go through Jeffrey's swinging door, his ever-revolving door.
This guy is big time. He knows people that know people that know people.
Flight logs from his plane and his address book read like a who's who of some of the richest and most famous and powerful people in the world. Celebrities, actors, philanthropists, academics, and world leaders.
It's really disappointing to look, as a lawyer, to look at this circumstance and say, how did this happen? One individual commits one abuse of a minor, in one instance of abuse of a minor, and they're held accountable for years and years through the criminal justice system. This individual abused hundreds of girls, and nothing happened. It's really, really unfortunate. We look at that and we say, how did the criminal justice system fail these girls in such a significant way? How has that happened?
Dershowitz said in a response to Farmer's affidavit, "Virtually everything in the complaint is false, and I will be able to disprove all of this in a court of law. I have told the truth throughout, and I'll be able to prove it. I never met her. I never heard of her." It's really hard to believe him, though, especially considering the fact that as more and more truth keeps coming to the top, those involved keep trying to muddy the waters.
There was ample physical evidence and witness testimony to support the girls' stories, including notepads seized from Epstein's home with their names and phone numbers, along with phone records. Despite the corroborating evidence, Palm Beach State Attorney Barry Krischer wanted to charge Epstein only with a misdemeanor.
And once that happened, it was clear to me that justice would not be served by the state attorney in the handling of the case, and we referred it to the FBI. And then there were many, many more victims after that time.
Epstein hired somebody that would impress the state attorney, Barry Krischer, to drop the investigation.
The U.S. Attorney's Office got involved with this case with Jeffrey Epstein's A-list of defense attorneys that are extremely well known and extremely powerful. I think these attorneys were able to manipulate the sitting U.S. attorney and the assistant U.S. attorney working the cases. A few things happened in this case that during my law enforcement career I've never seen before. The U.S. attorneys here had an indictment and they were sending it back and forth to Jeffrey's lawyers for changes. Never seen anything like that before.
Well, I started getting somewhat of an inclination that this is a situation where somehow, for some reason, the defendant and the government are working together against the victims, although that kind of conspiracy theory sounds so preposterous that I didn't want to believe it.
As the Herald points out, quote, in recent months, Dershowitz has waged a public relations war against Guffey, her lawyers, and the Miami Herald, which published a series of articles about Epstein in November. The series' Perversion of Justice focused on how the former U.S. Attorney in Miami, now Labor Secretary Alexander Acosta, brokered a non-prosecution deal giving Epstein federal immunity despite overwhelming evidence that he had sexually assaulted dozens of girls.
A subsequent FBI investigation found a sprawling network of victims and enough evidence to fill a 53-page indictment with federal sex crime charges. But Miami U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta signed off on a secret plea bargain, while deliberately not informing Epstein's victims. The deal granted Epstein and his accomplices immunity from federal prosecution. Epstein pleaded guilty in state court to 2 prostitution charges and served 13 months. Epstein's punishment was like that of no other sex offender in Florida. He had a private space in a vacant wing of the Palm Beach County Stockade, but records show he spent limited time there. He was allowed to go to his private West Palm Beach office, where he spent up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, often accepting visitors, including female friends.
What he ended up pleading to was a joke. The sentence he served was even a bigger joke. And then his probation was a slap in everybody's face.
The government, by that agreement, was definitely putting their name on something that they believed at that moment was ending the possibility of prosecution and ending the victim's rights. Right there, that's what the government believed.
How can you do that to all these girls? How can you tell them that what he did was okay?
Acosta, now President Trump's labor secretary, didn't explain why he sealed the details of Epstein's plea so that no one would know the scope of Epstein's crimes or who was involved. Years later, he said he and his staff were bombarded by Epstein's army of legal superstars who launched a year-long assault against him and other prosecutors that they took all the way to the U.S. Attorney General in Washington, D.C.
Guys, those who make a living from defending convicted pedophiles and smearing those who question their motives most assuredly deserve scrutiny. Hopefully, as more and more evidence and pressure continues to mount, we might be able to see some justice for these victims. All you can really say is, what can you expect from a guy who's a friend to the Clintons? Leave your thoughts about this for the world, the Google Thought Police, and wealthy, disgusting pedophiles like Jeffrey Epstein in the comments section below. If you guys enjoy these videos, be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification icon, give it a thumbs up, and share it with everybody you know. Also, check out over 100 hard-hitting designs in the shirt store, and if you want to support more content, hit me up on Patreon or PayPal. All those links will be in the description and in the pinned comment. I'll see you guys in the next heavily censored shadow ban video.